X Radio, programming for the open mind.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. Appreciate each and every one. And we have with us tonight Barbara Duncan.
I'm still here.
And speaking from around the world, where do we have guests at tonight?
I was afraid you were going to ask that question. We got guests coming from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Spain, and unknown.
All right. At least they're still hanging around, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
And we got with us tonight Jeffrey Gould.
Hello.
And I want to welcome back our guest, Keven McQueen.
Hello again.
All right. A lot of good stuff in this book. Matter of fact, all your books has good stuff about the different states that you write about. Which,
Thank you.
Which is real interesting. Of course, you got another one that you're working on now?
Well, what's coming up next, I wrote a book in 2005 or 2004 called Murder in Old Kentucky, which was my first historical true crime book. And it's been out of print for a while, but Indiana University Press is bringing it back in a reprinted version. I should say, revised and expanded with 7 new stories.
And what's that one called?
Murder in Old Kentucky.
Murder in Old Kentucky. Woo!
Gives me a chance to correct some mistakes and add new information that I found since the book was in print, plus add 7 brand new stories. Not sure when it's out. I think probably spring of 2021.
Okay. Well, we got something to look forward to next year, right?
Maybe 2.
Maybe 2 of them, huh?
I'm always working on something.
When I neglected to tell people exactly what you do besides write.
Oh, well, I teach English at Easterm Kentucky University.
And Eastern Kentucky University is in where?
Eastern Kentucky, I would guess.
Oh, yes. That's right.
Very good, Jeff.
It's in Richmond.
In Richmond.
Madison County.
Okay.
With
I got
satellite campuses.
my wife's got some nieces and stuff that lives down in Richmond. And I had some...
So when you say that you teach English, do you teach English writing or English literature?
Well, both. English composition and world literature.
Okay. The good stuff.
Oh, I enjoy it greatly.
I had some... Go ahead, Barbara.
Well, I was going to, because we have to get this elephant out of the room, which is, I have to know the second Beethoven's fifth or first.
Well, what we have here, it's sometimes said that the very first performance of a Beethoven symphony in America took place in Lexington. Well, it's almost true. Actually, the third performance of a Beethoven symphony was in Lexington. But it was the second time that Beethoven's first symphony had been performed.
Wow. And that includes New York, San Francisco, all of those places.
Yeah, it actually turns out the very, very first American debut of Beethoven was in South Carolina in 1805. And then another South Carolina performance. And then Lexington, Kentucky, 1817.
That's amazing. Yeah, I would consider, we'd think that New York or even Washington, D.C. would have had that distinction first, being more of a center of the cultural era.
I just wonder what it sounded like.
And who was playing it? I mean, obviously, they were using local orchestras, or what would pass as an orchestra, right?
Yeah, I wonder. I assume there were some violins. I mean, there would have been violins around at the time, mostly frontier type instruments, I guess, but there would have been a lot of immigrants from other nations who probably had some classical style instruments. It was conducted by a man named Eckhart.
And
Oh,
probably,
I'm sorry, it was a man named Heinrich. My mistake, it was a man named Heinrich. Eckhart was the guy in South Carolina.
And probably where it was performed would have been interesting too, acoustically.
Well, that's the funny part. It was actually performed in a tavern.
What?
Yeah.
Well, that's about all they had, wasn't it?
Okay.
I mean, really, it would have been too early for there to be a symphony hall or something, because back in 1817, Lexington and Kentucky in general would have been considered the Wild West. There weren't really very many states or any settlements any farther west than that.
Well,
Maybe Indiana, Illinois.
You still had Indians back then. I mean, they could raid and stuff.
Yeah. There were a few states west, but by the late 1700s, Kentucky really was considered the Wild West.
Yep.
You could just see the feuds now over Beethoven versus Mozart, and
It would have been really funny if they had a fight over Beethoven versus Mozart. I can just see them now having a frontier-style knockdown, drag-out fight over which was the greater composer.
Yeah, but half of their arguments would fall on deaf ears.
bad.
Well, I mentioned that Heinrich was the conductor in Lexington. He later helped found the New York Philharmonic Society. So he must have been a pretty good conductor. Still, you have to wonder what it sounded like.
Yeah,
Beethoven.
true. But yeah, you kind of makes you wonder how that journey went and why he ended up in Kentucky and then on to New York.
I'd love to know. I had been hoping I could find some reviews of it. I found advertisements that they were about to perform Beethoven at the tavern, but no reviews afterward. It would have been very interesting to see what the Kentuckians of 1817 thought about it.
How big was the town at that point?
Not very. It was probably the largest town in Kentucky at the time, but it wouldn't have been a really, really large city.
So there would have been at some point a higher society, a social group that would have lived in this.
Yeah, even by 1817.
Because if that's, yeah.
So there may even have been people in, tucks and tails and collars showing up.
Okay. And I guess the tavern would have been the largest area that they probably could have performed in, yeah.
Probably so. Yeah, no concert halls yet.
And probably the houses that were built at that time didn't have the larger ballrooms like they did in some areas.
I think a few wealthy people had them, but by today's standards, they wouldn't have been very large.
Interesting.
I got a question from the chat room, and it's from Tabby, and she wants to know what interesting paranormal stories have you heard about Abraham Lincoln?
Well, I don't have any in the book, but there are really quite a few stories that he haunts the White House.
I've heard that.
I'm trying to remember, it was Queen Wilhelmina, I think, in the 1930s, came to stay overnight and said she saw Lincoln sitting in a chair.
Didn't Winston Churchill also see him?
I think he did.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of ghost stories about Abraham Lincoln. None in the book, but there are quite a few about him.
Well, his wife was quite a spiritualist, was she not?
Yes, she was.
And I thought he continued that after their son's death.
It was the death of their son that really, really drove her into spiritualism.
Yeah.
Yeah, she ended up getting remarried too, didn't she?
No, I don't believe she ever did. In fact, she spent some time in an asylum.
Ah.
she went a little crazy after her son died, and then even more so after Abraham Lincoln died. And she definitely did continue spiritualism right up to the very end.
No, I've kind of like read stories and stuff where people has seen him in the White House. So you wonder how much actually that has happened that doesn't really get reported, because people just don't go running around the White House too much anymore. Didn't at one time they used to? I mean, they would have drinking parties and everything there.
Oh yeah, especially when Andrew Jackson was president.
Yeah.
People really went nuts there. Harry Truman used to say that Abraham Lincoln haunted the White House. No one was really sure if he was kidding or not, but he used to say it.
Well, Abraham would just stand there saying, it's the Lincoln bedroom, right?
That's quite interesting. Okay, we have to get to this because I am dying to know about Charles Manson's Surprises an Idiot.
What?
Yeah. I wondered when that was going to come up, because I was sure that it would.
Oh, yeah.
Well, now there's a backstory as to why that happened, right?
Oh, there is. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You should tell the whole thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant you had a backstory
No, not
about
me.
bringing it up. So, well, it's the last chapter in the book. It's the only thing I've ever written that was autobiographical. And the reason it's in the book is because Manson had Kentucky family ties. But it's a true story. The chapter of the title, as you mentioned, is Charles Manson Surprises an Idiot. And the idiot happens to be me.
Oops.
What happened was, back in 1985, when I was a college freshman, I read in the newspaper that Manson spent his time making dolls out of sock yarn. That he would unravel socks, and I don't know how he assembled them into dolls, but he was making dolls out of old sock yarn. And I thought that was very interesting. And at the cafeteria, I told some people at the table, you know what, I think I'm going to write to him and see if I can get one. And everyone, of course, laughed and made fun of me. They used to laugh and make fun of me over other things too, but especially over that thing. So I figured I would prove that I would write to him, even if he didn't write back. So I went to the library and I got the address of the prison where he was supposedly staying. And I sent a really nice letter asking if it were possible to get one of his dolls. And I didn't think he'd write back. He's Charles Manson. What's he going to write to a college kid for? And a few weeks later, he really did write back. And he said he would send me one of his dolls. And a week or so after that, I got another letter from him, but no doll was in the envelope. So I thought, well, I'll push my luck. I'll ask him where it is if he thinks anyone stole it. And he said, no, I don't think it ever even got out of the prison.
Oh.
And he ended the letter with, I don't think it was a threat exactly, but it wasn't very friendly. Something along the lines of, I'm not a pen pal, don't write me no more. And he gave me the address of another prisoner who he said would write all day.
Oh, my God.
But I guess he felt kind of bad about it, because later he sent a third letter that I didn't even ask for, complete with a few Polaroid photos showing some of his sock dolls on a line with these blue, I assume they were prison uniforms. And then still later he sent a fourth note, just asking if I had ever received his doll. He had a couple friends on the outside who actually did send me a doll.
Aw.
So I've got 4 handwritten Charles Manson letters, some Polaroids that he took, and one of his sock dolls.
Oh, my goodness.
That
this-
technically would be very valuable. That would be like getting one of Adolf's paintings, wouldn't it?
It would, and if you didn't know who made it, you'd actually think it was a very neat little work of art. It's called Little Coup, like a coup stick. If you look closely, it has a bow and arrow and a coup stick, like the kind Native Americans used. And to this day, I have no idea why he wrote me back.
Probably felt bad about what he had done.
Maybe.
Yeah, I doubt it.
I actually think it was the Kentucky connection.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because in one of the letters he mentioned that his grandfather was a railroad conductor in Kentucky, at Big Sandy, Kentucky.
Wow.
What really made it interesting was at the time that was actually not a well-known fact, but later it came out that he did indeed. His grandfather was a railroad conductor.
Wow.
And you said he had friends on the outside that would take care of that?
He has lots of friends on the outside.
Called cultists.
Yeah.
I actually recently saw there was a biopic. Oh, I don't know about biopic correct, but it was about Charlie Manson. I can't remember the title of it, but Charles was played by Matt Smith, and he was
my goodness.
brilliant. He was brilliant, and I was like, "This is very disturbing." I mean, he is such a great actor, but it was fascinating to watch him play that role.
Wow.
I'm just shocked that you. It was obviously your university address that he sent it to, and not your home address.
Yeah, I went to my college post office box.
Oh, good. I can imagine.
Oh, I
Someone knocking
imagine,
on the
all
door.
right. I was very nervous for years afterwards, thinking, well, he's not getting out of jail, but he does have friends.
Yeah. Who obviously sent you things.
Yeah, I never really talked about it very much for years. I told a few people about it. Then after he passed away, I thought, well, it's a pretty good story. I guess it's time to tell it.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully most of them just can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Squeaky Frum got out of, remember back in 87, she broke out of jail for a few days?
Right.
I spent those days thinking, I hope she doesn't show up here. Because
I
she
was
was in
thinking with a
prison
name
in
like
West Virginia, which is right next to Kentucky, and it didn't require much imagination to think it's not that far from there to here.
Wow.
I was
It's
thinking
probably a direct route through.
She could show up.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, with a name like Squeaky, could you really sneak up on anybody?
Well, she's pretty well known too. I think I would have known her if I saw her.
yeah.
No.
I just can't imagine that. We've had a couple of authors on. One was a lady whose mother introduced her to Ted Bundy.
Oh dear.
And it's like it's interesting how the correlations sometimes happen where probably very inadvertently you come across these really crazy people
Yeah, I think so.
or murdering people or whatever. Both of them had quite a mean streak, so to speak. I just can't imagine. Well, I suppose you're going to hold on to those forever.
Well,
Probably.
Yeah.
I read that book that the guy wrote about how they got captured, the trial.
Helter Skelter.
Oh,
Yeah,
Helter Skelter.
Helter Skelter. And I mean, it would give you goosebumps reading what all they did to those people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really. And that was why I started thinking maybe writing Charles Manson wasn't such a good idea.
And asking for it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of.
People who
totally
collected.
Oh.
There were a lot of people who collected the clown artwork of John Wayne Gacy when he was in
that's
prison.
true.
And the interesting part of that is that there's some people that think that some of the places where those paintings were stored are haunted.
Wow.
Ooh.
So now that he's dead, you might want to.
At least you know just to put him in the crawl space.
Did you ever check to see what he put in the sock?
Ah,
Didn't.
oh no. Yeah, what is the stuffing? Ooh. Talk about Lincoln leaving locks
They
in
were
his head.
evil. They were knitted with evil.
Evil. Yeah, pretty much.
Secret. That's the commercial for it. You hold it up and say, the secret ingredient is evil.
Well, you actually had a lot of, or not you, I mean, Kentucky had a lot of murderers. I mean, and they were just ruthless. On page 81, you got a story called A Self-Made Widow.
Oh, that's a Clay County story.
Yep, Clay County story.
That was a really weird one. There were so many Clay County murder stories to pick from.
That's true.
I chose that one just because it was so odd. Man disappears. His son goes looking for him. This was in the early 1930s. Finds that his mother is living with a different man and says, "Oh, he kidnapped me." And the son didn't believe it and did a little work into it and found out that they'd actually murdered his father and buried the body under, I think they'd built a new house on top of it. They were pretty easily caught, easily found. They went to jail. They almost got the death penalty. In fact, the man did get the death penalty, but one of the governors on his way out of office commuted his sentence.
And
It actually reads better than it sounds.
oh, yeah. Each one, once they actually got caught, they started turning on one another. Well, no, he did it. No, she did it.
Yeah, and then I think it turned out that it did turn out that she actually killed the husband herself. In fact, she hit him a few neck blows with an axe. And then they kept the axe.
Yep.
Probably a good axe.
I think that was one of the details that interested me, is why would you keep that? But they did keep it.
Well, I don't think that they thought things through too much back then, especially
No.
there in the hills.
Just go to Home Depot and say, you know, I need another axe. The other one was used in a murder. I mean, at least you know it works.
That's true. You know, it's sharp. They really bungled it. It was, to me, an interesting story because they did it so badly, and then they turned on each other.
You had another one there in Clay County called Feud for Thought, and that's on 83.
Yeah, that was one where that one almost defies a synopsis because there were just so many shootings going on there. One guy, he shot someone. He was described as being his best friend, in fact. And the newspapers refused to divulge the name of the shooter. And then he got shot himself by someone else. And then they revealed his name. And it turned out he'd been, I think, the third person killed in a feud that very same month, something like that. And that's the kind of thing that makes you see why, for a while, the legislature was thinking of breaking up the county and getting rid of it.
Yeah,
I mean, what did they think that would have accomplished, though? I mean, everybody would still be living in the same places, having the same fights.
I guess it's just because the county had such a bad reputation. They thought if they got rid of the name of the county, it doesn't make any sense to me either. But
yeah, I know.
I guess at the time it would have been a guy's idea, but yeah.
maybe they thought if people were living in different jurisdictions, there would be more law people involved, maybe.
Or change the name of the towns.
Yeah, I never did really follow the logic behind it.
I know my dad was hitchhiking one time down there, and guy stopped and picked him up, and I guess he was taking him down the road anyway. He wanted something out of the glove compartment and told my dad to get it, and he opened the door up, and there's a gun in there. And come to find out that the guy that gave him a ride was somebody who was known as a hitman in the area.
Oh,
As long as you don't have a contract, he's not going to do amateur killing.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to be in the car in case somebody else decided to, ambush him on the road.
Oh, that's true. A little Bonnie and Clyde reenactment there.
Something like that, yeah. No, nothing to do with them people down there. Like I said, and I tell you how bad it is. I had some people lives there in Richmond. I guess it was a brother to my grandpa, and he had two sons. Of course, they couldn't read and write very good. And the one son's last name is Foister. So the second one, he couldn't see how to write the name real good, and he wrote Foster. Yet they're brothers.
huh.
And
Wow.
they never got it changed, I reckon. That's just the way it was back then.
So they're brothers, but they have different last names.
They have different
now.
last names and the same dad, just same mom. Just he couldn't, when they wrote it down, the one couldn't write very good, and he just put the wrong last name on her, spelled it wrong. I guess that's the way it stayed.
Probably more trouble to fix it than just to leave it alone.
Yeah.
It's amazing what goes on in some places like that.
If you've never been to Kentucky,
I've never been to Kentucky.
well, I mean, Louisville, Lexington, they're big towns. But if you get off of the main road and back into some of these little hollers and little towns, it's a totally different world. Believe you me.
Playing banjos on bridges and stuff. Oh.
Well, that's kind of instruments that they played down there, with banjos and guitars, and sit around on the porch and stuff. That's what they did. I know the house that my grandma lived in when my mom and uncle was born. They didn't have all the running water and all that stuff. They had an outhouse. They didn't have a refrigerator. They had a creek that had a dugout on the side of the creek that they'd keep their milk and meat and stuff in to keep it cold. I mean, that's the way that they lived. So that's the way my mom was raised for a long time. I'm glad I didn't have to do that.
But it sounds like there's still a lot going on in Kentucky. Are there any new modern stories that caught your eye, Kevin?
Oh, there's lots of things that go on. I'd write about them, but they're just too recent. You always risk getting someone angry if you write about something that happened recently.
What's the cutoff date that you put things in your books? Is there a time limit?
Usually I don't touch anything that happened after about 1940. So I did all this research from 1877 to 1939, and now I'm starting over with the 1830s. But I figure after 1940 it's probably pretty safe. I've done a few stories that took place after then, but not very many.
I'm sure there's a lot of stories during World War II, like up to 45.
Oh, I'm sure. One of these days I may go on and just do 1940 to 45.
Has Ancestry.com caught up with that? I mean, as far as people going, oh, I'm related to this person?
Probably so. I use Ancestry a little bit. I don't use it as much as I probably should.
As far as looking up relatives or trying to validate some stories?
Validating stories, finding when people passed away, looking for death certificates, things like that.
Does Ancestry, would they cover I mean, if you had a trial that you wanted to find out what the actual cause of death is, would that be in Ancestry.com? Do you look that sort of stuff up?
I don't know if they have court records like trials. I know they have things like birth certificates and death certificates, census records. I found some really good things from old census records.
And that would be the locations and things, and I guess, right?
Yeah. What I'll often do is if someone actually went to trial, I'll find out the dates when they did, and then I'll try to get the local paper through interlibrary loan, because you'll always get more details from local papers.
Oh, because they know the backstory of the people involved, right?
Yeah, they do. So you can always count on local paper. You can't always get one, but if you can, they're almost always going to have more information.
Yeah, back then, I guess the papers were a little bit more verbose with
Very
information.
much. Yeah, you always have to really rewrite a lot of what they said. So they tend to be, sometimes you'll find quotes that are so good you have to use them word for word. They'll put things so dryly and strangely you've just got to use it. But by and large, you find that you can really shorten a lot of what they say by quite a bit.
I know my great grandpa, him and his brother come over from England, and I believe it's from somewhere around, I want to say Coventry or something like that. I got their documents. I forget what they were, but they came over in 18, I want to say 65, 1870, something like that. And they moved to Kentucky when they come over. So that's how most of the Foysters got down and around Kentucky. I don't think I got any royalty over there, though, but that's where they come from.
I may be misremembering, but wasn't there a Foyster involved in the Borley Rectory haunting in England?
I have no idea.
Oh.
I think there was a Foyster, or maybe it was Royster, but it's sort of ringing a bell.
Hold on here. The rectory?
Borley. It's the most famous haunted house in England, or it was, until it burned down in the late 30s.
I'll have to look up and see if I got anything on that.
I think it was Foyster, Foyster.
It's spelled a lot of different ways over there.
But if you Google Borley Rectory Foyster, it may actually come up.
It's possible.
I may be wrong about that, but that seems to ring a bell.
Okay, you got to tell us about this one. It's in your book, and it's on page 85.
Here we go. The Borley Rectory. The Foysters left Borley in October 1935 as a result of Lionel Foyster's death.
Really?
Well, I actually remembered something.
Huh.
You did.
I didn't know that. I'll have to look that up. Wow.
But yeah, I think a lot of people did that when they came to the United States, immigrated through when they hit Ellis Island or wherever they stopped. Names got written differently.
Yeah.
And you're right.
Especially Middle Eastern type names, they would anglicize them.
In this case, it is Foyster. But yeah, you can see that.
Wow.
But we're learning a lot of stuff tonight. This is good.
Educational and informative.
Yes,
Very.
sir. But page 85.
Oh, right.
The
monkey hoax.
the Great Madison County monkey hoax.
Well, there was a traveling salesman in the 1870s and 80s named Joseph Mulhattan, and he was famous for his hoaxes. He was a traveling salesman in Kentucky, but also sometimes he'd go to other states. And he would make up these wild stories and send them to the wire services or the newspapers. So he's sort of like the father of the urban legend and the grandfather of fake news, because he came up with these very convincing hoaxes that got spread around the USA. And some of them are still famous even today, even though he's been forgotten. Excuse me. I wrote an entire biography of him that still has never been published, but I've been using bits and pieces of it so it wouldn't go to waste. So this book contains one of the chapters from the unpublished book about when he went to Madison County, Kentucky, and he made up a story about his friend J.B. Parks having trained monkeys working in his hemp field. And it created a sensation because the nation was under a period of national unrest at the time because of labor unions going on strike. And people were terrified that monkeys would be trained to take over their jobs.
Oh, wow.
So in the book, I've even reproduced from old newspapers angry editorials and letters of protest, minutes from meetings complaining about monkey labor. It's really quite funny.
Well, that just sounds bananas.
Yeah, people just didn't even look into it, really. One famous scientist said that this helped prove evolution, and he put it in a textbook, and it stayed in the textbook for decades.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. That's
And
amazing.
that actually took place right near Richmond, very close to where I now live. So that one was, for me, almost a local story.
So he's kind of the early version of the Weekly World News.
Yeah, in a way, he really was. He was from Pennsylvania. He wrote his early hoaxes under the name Orange Blossom, and then later he gave up the Orange Blossom pseudonym and just didn't sign them at all because people started getting suspicious of anything that was signed Orange Blossom.
Wow.
So he would just send these stories to any
Mostly,
newspaper?
yeah, to newspapers, and then they'd get reproduced by other newspapers.
Wow.
Because you remember after John Wilkes Booth was shot, there was a big rumor going around that he survived.
Right.
And Mulhattan, he didn't totally invent that, but he's one of the people who popularized the idea that John Wilkes Booth got away. So some of his hoaxes actually are still with us.
So how were these stories transmitted to these different newspapers?
Well, they even had wire services back then, like the Associated Press. So they would simply hear a story and they'd read it in a paper, and if it was a really good story and they didn't bother to check up on it first, they would send it out.
As sort of like a ticker tape.
Yeah, almost like internet hoaxes today.
Okay.
They just too good to not pass along, and they'd pass it along, and before you knew it, this fake story would be in papers all over the USA.
Wow.
No, he really came up with some good ones. I've got some more in some of my other books.
You got to admire the creativity of somebody like that to a certain degree. I mean, none of his stories caused harm to anyone. Right?
No, that was one of the nice things, is that they weren't malicious stories. Sometimes people got some trouble from them anyway. For example, the man that he usually put real people too in his stories. So the farmer that he said had trained monkeys, J.B. Parks, was a real person. And he started getting letters from all over the USA, some angry letters, some letters saying, hey, tell us how to train monkeys to work.
I
Sounds
love
more
it.
like he was the early Onion or the Babylon Bee.
Yeah, kind of a one-man onion. He really should be a lot more famous. For a while, he was almost as famous as Mark Twain. And then he became so obscure that I had to really work and work and work to find out what even happened to him. But it turns out that he died in Arizona as a gold miner about 1912, I think.
Wow.
He drowned crossing a river. So I had to for a long time, I had no idea what happened to him.
That's amazing.
He lived in Louisville, and he would travel from Louisville as a hardware salesman. In fact, I got an email just today from someone asking about him.
Huh.
I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, you look at this, how people come up with these stories. And there must have been some sort of natural occurrence that would make him think up some of the stuff.
Yes, more based on real events.
Yeah, and just expounded on it. And I think it's kind of a P.T. Barnum thing in a way. Get people to believe whatever story you want. Was he ever asking for money or donations for this, or he was just doing it just to do this?
Just for fun, I think, but also to keep his name in the news, because as a traveling salesman, you have to make friends, you have to be well known, you have to be a good storyteller, or at least back then you had to.
Okay.
So it was almost an advertisement for himself.
Okay.
If he could get these stories in the papers. It didn't seem to hurt his business any.
He eventually then started signing his name or fessing up to the stories at that point.
Well, he would send them in anonymously. Once his pen name became too famous, he just didn't use any name at all.
Oh, they just knew the story?
Later, people would figure it out. And then you'd see it in the papers, this story about there being a second moon, well, that was just a Manhattan. In fact, his name became synonymous with lying. For a long time, if someone told a lie, people would say, well, that was in Manhattan.
Oh, interesting.
I've documented this in lots of old newspapers.
And not just local ones. This would have been all over the United States.
Oh, all over.
Fascinating.
Got one last interesting story in here that before we have to stop, because it's already about 10 till. But it's called, it's on page 100, and it says, Professor Tobin baffles Louisville, then the world.
Oh, I had a lot of fun with that one. I'm glad I got that one in a book. It actually came as kind of a surprise. I was in Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville, and there was a brand new, very beautiful modern tombstone on a man named Professor Thomas Tobin. When I took a closer look at it, it turned out he was a professor, but also a magician. And I did a little work on it, and I found that his grave had been unmarked for decades and decades and decades, but very recently, let me find the year. It was only a few years ago. I'll find it.
Well, he died in 1844.
2018. Just about 2 years ago, Society of Magicians put up a tombstone for him. But he created some magic tricks that are still used to this very day. Like if you go into your local spook house and you see there's a disembodied head on the table and it's actually able to speak to you, that was one of his illusions. It's really, mirrors are under the table hiding the body of the person with their head sticking through a hole in the table.
Wow.
And one of his illusions is still used at the Haunted Mansion at Disney World, where you use mirrors to make it seem as if a ghost, a transparent person, is walking around. But anyway, he was from England, and he lived in Louisville for a while. And one day he went into a restaurant in a hotel, and he drew this figure, this shape, on a piece of paper, which is reproduced in the book. And he told everyone that he would give $50 if they were able to recreate the pattern without retracing a line and without lifting the pen off the paper. And the whole city was in a grip of mania for days trying to recreate this shape. $50 was a lot of money back then. And then the word spread to other cities and other newspapers. So suddenly it became a national craze trying to reproduce the figure. Sort of the Rubik's Cube of its day, I guess. One thing I found interesting, how today bosses are always complaining that people are playing with their cell phones instead of working? Well, back then, bosses were complaining that people were trying to recreate this figure on paper instead of working.
It's funny.
Yeah, it's a circle with a box and an X in the box, and all the lines are touching.
Yes.
And once you start from whatever point to draw it, you can't take the pen off the paper and you can't go over the same line twice.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So the thing that made it really amusing is that it turns out that it was actually a hoax, that it's impossible to do that. So people have been trying for days and days to recreate an impossible challenge.
And nobody ever figured it out?
No. But it's actually physically impossible to draw it the way that he instructed people to draw it. So people were trying to find the solution to an unsolvable puzzle.
I've seen those before.
So that's what made it really funny.
I was just going to say, if anybody figured out that it was impossible and finally put something in the paper that.
After about a week of everyone going crazy trying to solve the puzzle, he finally admitted that it had no solution. In the book, I suggest that the international magicians need to put that figure on his tombstone.
Wow.
It was very interesting. It turns out he was a science teacher where I teach, Easterm Kentucky University, back in the days when it was called Central,
Oh, wow.
and that he was one of the first people in America to cook using electricity.
Really?
Yeah. Thomas Tobin.
The things that you learn.
Electricity on a stove, electrical
Yep.
stove?
As science experiments. So it's sort of interesting to think about that. At one time, nobody really cooked with electricity. Somebody
Right.
had to do it first and show that it was possible. And he
Right.
was one of the first people to do it.
And he's probably the start of the warmer plate that science
Maybe.
uses all the time. Yeah.
It could be.
Wow.
Wow. So
The
you
paper
learn a
is
lot of
more
things.
Yeah.
You learn a lot of things here on Para X on the Paranormal View.
Yep.
Educational, yet entertaining.
Yep.
Yes.
Sure is.
And we throw in a few ghosts and cooking shows.
True. True.
Yeah.
Speaking of ghosts, I was contacted by somebody who wanted me to look into getting Para X to have an event next year at Waverly.
Oh,
Oh, that was
nice.
a great place.
Have you ever been there?
I have been there twice. I have to say it's the scariest place I've ever been.
I think
I mean, even disregarding ghosts or anything else, it's this enormous abandoned hospital,
yes.
complete with a morgue and a cafeteria and all these old rooms, and just it's like something out of a very bad dream.
Yeah, I've been there like 3 times with Para X, so run around at night like that and no telling what you might see or hear. But yeah, they wanted me to look into it. I contacted Dave to see if we tried to set something up, if he would be the contact to get things to do that and go with, because he knew all about the place and lead people around. So I contacted Rebecca. They are looking into the idea of it. So it won't be me doing it or leading it, but I've got people looking into it. So if for some reason, sometime next summer or toward the fall, if we do something like that, I'll let you know if you want to go with us.
Oh, I'd love to.
Whew.
I wish I could go there in the daytime. I don't think they have daytime tours, but I'd like to go in the day.
They used
when
to
there's
have
around.
daytime tours. So I'd call them and
Yeah.
ask, because I'm pretty sure they have like a 3-hour or something like that tour of the place. That you
Yeah,
can-
that would be great.
Yeah,
A 3-hour tour, just don't go with Professor and Marianne.
right.
Yeah, I was waiting for a pause, but you got there first.
All right.
And as we tell people, if it's haunted at night, it's haunted in the daytime. So,
is.
it won't matter where you go.
Oh,
So,
yeah, I'd
That-
rather
Probably
go in
see
the
them a lot
daytime.
better.
That's right.
It's so full of people at night. The only objection I have is that if you hear a strange noise, well, there's just so many people around.
Yes, that's true.
But in the
That's true.
daytime, there'd be almost nobody there. And if you heard anything, that would be more likely, to be
Something.
convincing.
Yeah.
exactly.
All
And
right.
it's less likely you're going to trip over something in the daytime.
We're down to like 3 minutes. I hope everybody has enjoyed the show tonight, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us as always. And
Thanks for having me back on.
we'll have to get another book here sometime before too long, and because you got books of all the different states just about, or areas anyway, and we'll have some more stories. So what I want you to do is give out all your info where people can follow you and listen to you and find you, and then stay on till we're off.
Well, the two easiest ways are to go to my Facebook author page, which is just simply Keven McQueen. And I should point out my first name is spelled Keven. There's also a Kevin D. McQueen, which I call my weird comedy page. And then my author page online is just kevinmcqueenstories.com. So if you remember my name spelling, I'm not hard to find. And I'd be very glad to hear from you.
And you can listen to the replays on ParaX and on, I guess right now they're still on Podomatic, so we can do that still for a while. So I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight, those who are in chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate everything. And Barbara, you got anything to add here?
Wear your mask, wash your hands, and back off.
And back off.
Well said.
All right. Till next week, I guess we'll see you at the same time. So this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
And Barbara Duncan.
And we will see you next week at the same time. So good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal